Black Janitor noticed symptoms everyone else ignored and ended up saving the life of a millionaire CEO. The executive elevator at Manhattan Business Tower had never stopped on the 25th floor at 3 in the morning, but there stood Morgan Washington, night janitor for 15 years, watching through the tinted glass of the boardroom as a woman collapsed onto the mahogany table that cost more than his annual salary. Megan Fox, CEO of Sterling Industries, and one of the most powerful women in the country, was clearly in trouble. Her face was contorted with pain. Her left arm hung limply, and when she tried to speak on the phone, her words came out slurred and incomprehensible. Morgan recognized the signs immediately. A stroke in progress at 52. Morgan had learned medicine the hard way. His wife Dorothy had been a nurse specializing in neurology for 20 years before she died in an accident 5 years ago. During their decades of marriage, she had turned every dinner into an emergency medicine class, insisting that medical knowledge saved lives regardless of who you were. Morgan hesitated for a second. He was the invisible janitor who cleaned the offices after the executives left. Megan Fox was the woman whose face graced business magazines, who moved billions with a simple email. Their worlds never crossed except when she occasionally ignored him completely in rare hallway encounters. But Dorothy always said that neurological symptoms didn't respect social class or skin color. Morgan opened the conference room door. "Miss Sterling, you're having a stroke. Don't try to talk, just listen to me." His voice carried the calm authority of someone who had watched Dorothy guide families through medical crises for 2 decades. Megan tried to protest, but the words came out even more garbled. Panic began to take hold of her eyes when she realized that something was terribly wrong. Morgan was already dialing 911 as he positioned Megan to prevent further neurological damage. "Ambulance to the Manhattan Tower, 25th floor. Female patient mid-40s, presenting with classic stroke symptoms, facial paralysis, weakness in left arm, slurred speech. Symptoms began approximately 5 minutes ago." The 911 operator was surprised by the medical accuracy of someone who identified himself as a janitor, but Morgan continued to provide clinical information with the ease of a healthcare professional. When the paramedics arrived, they found Megan stabilized in the correct position, with Morgan providing a detailed account of her symptoms and progression. One of the paramedics whispered to his colleague, "This guy knows more about neurology than half the nurses I know." At the hospital, while Megan received the treatment that would save her life, Morgan returned to work as if nothing had happened. After all, he was just the night janitor, the invisible man who kept the building running while the powerful slept in their mansions. What Morgan didn't know was that this night would change his life in ways even Dorothy couldn't have predicted. And what Megan Fox would discover about prejudice, medicine, and the true definition of competence would rewrite everything she thought she knew about human value. If you're following this story of how knowledge can break down barriers that money builds, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple act of humanity would expose a conspiracy that threatened not only Megan's life, but the entire power structure she represented. The next morning, Morgan arrived at work expecting life to return to normal. But he found an unpleasant surprise waiting for him in the employee locker room, a formal warning note on his locker. Inappropriate use of the executive elevator during work hours. Unauthorized access to corporate facilities after hours. The signature belonged to Wilson Carter, security manager and the kind of man who measured his own worth by his power to make other people's lives miserable. Morgan folded the paper calmly. 15 years of impeccable work, never a complaint, and now he was being punished for saving the CEO's life. The irony was not lost on him. In the corporate world, even doing the right thing could be turned into a crime when you were the wrong man doing it. What really bothered Morgan wasn't the warning itself, but the timing. How did Carter find out about the previous night's events so quickly? The hospital maintained medical confidentiality, and the paramedics had no reason to report details to the company. Someone was watching Megan Fox's movements very closely. During the morning shift, Morgan discreetly observed the movement on the 25th floor. Dr. Patterson, Megan's personal physician, arrived 2 hours later than usual with an expression that mixed irritation and what looked like genuine panic. Through the glass doors, Morgan saw a heated discussion between the doctor and Wilson Carter. Dorothy's memory came back to him like a blow. "Jamie," she used to say when they reviewed complex cases over dinner, "when neurological symptoms appear suddenly in stressed executives, the first question should never be why now, but rather, who benefits if this person can no longer work?" Morgan had assumed that Megan's stroke was the result of stress and corporate pressure, but the tense conversation between Carter and Dr. Patterson planted a seed of doubt that Dorothy would have recognized immediately. Competent, doctors didn't panic when patients survived medical emergencies. They celebrated. That afternoon, Morgan received an unexpected call. Megan Fox wanted to see him in her office. When he arrived on the 25th floor, he found the CEO looking much better, but with an inquiring look that had not been present the night before. "Morgan, correct?" Megan gestured for him to sit in the chair across from her desk. "I want to thank you personally for what you did last night. The doctor said your quick action saved my life. I only did what any decent person would. Do, Miss Sterling." Megan studied his face with growing interest. "The paramedics were impressed with your medical knowledge. Where did you learn about neurological symptoms?" Morgan hesitated. Talking about Dorothy always hurt. But there was something in Megan's expression that suggested the question wasn't just polite. "My wife was a nurse, specializing in neurology, 20 years at Chicago General Hospital. She taught me how to recognize emergency signs. She was—" His voice faltered. "She died in an accident 5 years ago." Megan's expression softened genuinely. "I'm sorry for your loss." She paused as if weighing her next words carefully. "Morgan, can I ask you a strange question? In your informal medical opinion, did my symptoms yesterday seem natural?" The question caught Morgan off guard. Megan Fox, one of the most powerful women in the country, was asking a janitor for his medical opinion on her own condition. Even more intriguing, she was phrasing the question as if she suspected something wasn't right. "With all due respect, Miss Sterling, this is something you should discuss with your personal physician." "I have." Her response came too quickly, laden with barely concealed frustration. "Dr. Patterson said it was executive stress. He prescribed sedatives and recommended a vacation." Morgan felt a familiar chill. Dorothy always said that competent doctors investigated causes of strokes in young patients as if their lives depended on it. Because they did. Prescribing sedatives to someone who had just had a neurological event was not only inappropriate, it was potentially criminal. "Mrs. Sterling," Morgan said carefully, "did your wife ever mention similar symptoms before yesterday?" Megan froze. "How did you—" Stroke in a person in their 40s rarely happens out of the blue. There are usually warning signs that go unnoticed or are misinterpreted. Silence stretched between them as Megan processed the implication. Finally, she nodded slowly. Persistent headaches, occasional dizziness, episodes of mental confusion that Dr. Patterson attributed to work pressure. Morgan kept his expression neutral, but internally Dorothy was screaming alarms. Any competent neurologist would have ordered detailed tests in light of those symptoms. The fact that Dr. Patterson had ignored them meant one of two things: gross medical incompetence or something deliberately sinister. When Morgan left Megan's office 15 minutes later, Wilson Carter was waiting in the hallway, making a point of being seen observing the meeting. The smile he directed at Morgan contained a thinly veiled threat, as if to say, "We know you're meddling where you shouldn't be." That night, as Morgan cleaned up the empty offices, something Dorothy always insisted on echoed in his mind. "Jamie, there are no coincidences in medicine. When strange patterns appear, there's always someone behind them creating those patterns. What if Megan Fox hadn't simply had a stress-induced stroke? What if someone was deliberately putting her health at risk? Morgan thought about the warning in his locker, the argument between Carter and Dr. Patterson, the way they both seemed to know too much about events that should have been confidential. For 15 years, Morgan had been the invisible man. The janitor, no one noticed. But invisibility, he was beginning to realize, could be the most powerful weapon against people who thought themselves untouchable, especially when those people completely underestimated what a simple man was capable of observing, understanding, and, if necessary, exposing. Morgan spent the next 2 weeks doing something that 15 years of night work had taught him perfectly, being completely invisible while observing everything. What he discovered confirmed his worst fears about Megan Fox's situation. Dr. Patterson visited Wilson Carter's office 3 times a week, always carrying a brown medical briefcase that was never allowed to leave the office. During one of these visits, Morgan accidentally left his cleaning cart too close to the half-open door and overheard fragments of a conversation that made his blood run cold. The tests continue to show progressive cardiovascular deterioration, whispered Dr. Patterson. But I'm keeping the official reports within normal parameters as agreed. Perfect, replied Carter. How much longer do you estimate? With the medication I'm prescribing disguised as vitamins, I'd say we have another 6 months before the next serious episode, and that will probably be definitive. Morgan had to lean on the cart to keep from staggering. They weren't just neglecting Megan's health, they were actively poisoning her. Dorothy had always said that the worst kind of medical crime was one committed by someone who had sworn to protect lives. The missing piece of the puzzle came unexpectedly via Marcus Johnson, the air conditioning maintenance technician who worked in the offices during the day. Marcus was 10 years younger than Morgan, an Afghanistan veteran who had learned electronics in the Army and now supported 3 children with contract jobs. "Man, you gotta see this," Marcus whispered to Morgan during a shift change on a Friday. "I was installing new filters on the 25th floor when I overheard Carter on the phone. He was talking about Sterling Industries stock, something about buying large quantities before leadership changes he knew were coming." Morgan felt the pieces fall into place. Wilson Carter wasn't just an accomplice. He was the architect of the entire conspiracy. If Megan died or was incapacitated as senior security manager and member of the emergency board, Carter would temporarily take over the company's operations. With inside information about the leadership change, he could manipulate the stock market to make millions. "Marcus," Morgan said carefully, "do you still have contacts in the Army? People who understand documentation and evidence?" Marcus studied Morgan's face with the keen perception of someone who had served in combat zones. "Depending on what you need, maybe." "Why?" Morgan made a decision that would change everything. Over the next 2 hours, he told Marcus the whole story. Megan's stroke, the medical conspiracy, Carter's plans, his suspicions of gradual poisoning. Marcus listened quietly, asking precise questions that betrayed his military-trained intelligence. "That's attempted murder combined with large-scale financial fraud," Marcus said finally. "But proving it is going to be tricky. Do you have any hard evidence?" "Not yet," Morgan admitted, "but I know where to get it." The plan they devised was risky but elegant in its simplicity. Marcus would use his authorized access to the building systems to discreetly install recording equipment in Carter's and Dr. Patterson's offices. Morgan, with his knowledge of schedules and routines, would coordinate the operation during the weekends when security was minimal. "One thing bothers me," Marcus said as they reviewed the blueprints of the ventilation system. "Why didn't they just fire you after the warning? A guy who saves the CEO's life should be a hero, not someone being hounded." Morgan had thought the same thing. Why fire the hero right after he saves the boss? Better to keep the janitor invisible, where they could keep an eye on him. "They think I'm just an ignorant employee who got lucky recognizing the symptoms of a stroke." Carter and Dr. Patterson's arrogance was impressive. During their conversations, which Morgan was able to partially overhear, They spoke openly about him as the lucky janitor who wasn't educated enough to understand what had really happened. They even laughed about how Morgan had gotten himself into something he shouldn't have, but was too smart to keep causing trouble. They couldn't have been more wrong. The first test of the plan took place on a Monday night. While Morgan meticulously cleaned the 25th floor, Marcus worked silently in the ventilation ducts, installing microphones and microscopic cameras in the target offices. Marcus's military operation was impressive. In 45 minutes, he had established a surveillance network that a private detective would have taken weeks to set up. "Ready," Marcus said through the discreet communicator they had purchased. "Now we just wait for them to hang themselves with their own words." They didn't have to wait long. The following Wednesday, Carter and Dr. Patterson had a meeting that was recorded in its entirety. The content was even worse than Morgan had imagined. Not only did they confirm Megan's gradual poisoning, but they discussed in detail how to increase the dosage to speed up the process. "The press will love this story," Carter laughed. "Young, successful CEO tragically killed by executive stress. It will cause a national uproar about mental health in the corporate environment. Perfect smokescreen for the leadership transition." Morgan listened to the recording 3 times, each playback increasing his determination. Dorothy always said that knowledge without action was complicity. It was time to act. What Carter and Dr. Patterson didn't know was that their words had just signed their own death warrant, and the ignorant janitor they had underestimated was about to prove that true intelligence didn't come from degrees or social status, but from a combination of knowledge, determination, and the most dangerous weapon of all, the absolute certainty of being on the right side of justice. As he meticulously organized the evidence that would destroy them both, Morgan smiled for the first time in weeks. Dorothy would be proud. Not only had he saved a life, but he was about to expose a conspiracy that would shock the corporate world. The medicine she had taught him was being used not only to heal, but to deliver justice in a way no court could ignore. The following Wednesday would be remembered as the day arrogance met its final price. Morgan arrived at work, carrying something Carter and Dr. Patterson would never suspect: 3 flash drives containing 92 hours of recordings, 15 scanned fake medical documents, and financial evidence that a former military accountant had methodically compiled. Marcus had done more than install surveillance equipment. His Army contacts included financial crime experts who had analyzed Carter's stock buying patterns with the precision of a military intelligence operation. The result was devastating. 341 suspicious transactions, all timed perfectly with Megan's medical episodes. But Morgan had a plan that went beyond simply handing the evidence over to the authorities. Carter and Dr. Patterson needed to understand that they had underestimated the wrong man in the most humiliating way possible. The first phase began during the monthly Sterling Industries Executive Board meeting. Megan, still recovering and taking the vitamins prescribed by Dr. Patterson, presided over the table as 15 executives discussed quarterly reports Carter occupied, his usual position to her right, radiating the confidence of someone who believed he held the future in his hands. Morgan entered the conference room with his cleaning cart, as he had done hundreds of times before, but this time as he discreetly emptied the trash cans. He left a sealed envelope on Megan's stack of documents. When she opened it, she found a single typed line: "The vitamins you're taking aren't vitamins. Check the bottle, someone who cares." Megan's expression changed subtly, but Carter was too busy presenting financial projections to notice Morgan watched from afar as she surreptitiously examined the bottle of supplements she always carried in her purse. 15 years of being invisible had taught him to read facial expressions. With surgical precision, Megan had just realized that something was fundamentally wrong. The second phase came 2 hours later when Dr. Patterson arrived for his weekly routine consultation with Megan. He couldn't have known that Morgan had installed a directional microphone in the office lamp, or that Marcus was recording everything from a van parked across the street. "How are your stress symptoms?" Megan Dr. Patterson asked, with the false solicitude Morgan had learned to despise. Have you been taking your supplements as directed? Religiously, Megan replied, but her voice carried a note of suspicion that made the doctor shift uncomfortably in his chair. Actually, doctor, I'm considering a second medical opinion just to make sure we're getting the best treatment possible. Morgan saw panic flash across Dr. Patterson's face. Through the microscopic camera Marcus had installed. That's completely unnecessary. Megan, your tests show steady improvement. A second opinion could confuse the treatment, and how curious Megan interrupted, opening a drawer in the desk. Because I received this today. She produced the envelope Morgan had left along with a bottle of supplements. Someone suggests that these are not vitamins. What would you say if I sent them for independent laboratory analysis? Dr. Patterson paled visibly. Megan, you can't take an anonymous note seriously. This is clearly an attempt to sabotage his medical treatment, some disgruntled employee trying to cause trouble. Then you wouldn't mind if I had them tested. The question was phrased with the precision of someone accustomed to high-level corporate negotiations. Well, of course I wouldn't mind, but it's a waste of time and resources, I can assure you. That Megan raised her hand, silencing him. Dr. Patterson, in 15 years as a CEO, I've learned that when someone tries to dissuade me from checking something, that's exactly when I need to check it. The third phase was executed with military precision, while Dr. Patterson tried to convince Megan not to test the supplements. Marcus was delivering complete copies of all the evidence to the FBI, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the State Medical Board, and the Chicago Tribune. Morgan had insisted that Megan know the truth before the story went public. She deserved the dignity of fully understanding how her life had been manipulated before the whole world knew so. On Friday at 5 in the afternoon, Morgan knocked on Megan's office door carrying a briefcase that would change everything. May I come in, Mrs. Sterling? There's something important you need to know. Megan looked up immediately, recognizing the janitor who had saved her life twice, of course, Morgan. In fact, I want to thank you again. And I also want to know how you knew about the supplements. Morgan placed the briefcase on the desk with solemn ceremony. Miss Sterling, what I'm about to show you will shock you. But you need to know before the press publishes the story tomorrow morning. Over the next 45 minutes, Morgan methodically presented each piece of evidence, the recordings of Carter and Dr. Patterson discussing the gradual poisoning, the falsified medical documents, the financial transactions proving that Carter had been manipulating the stock market based on her planned deterioration in health. Megan listened in growing silence, her expression shifting from surprise to horror, and finally, to a cold anger that Morgan recognized as the controlled fury of someone accustomed to wielding power. They thought I was just an ignorant janitor, Morgan said when he finished. Someone who had been lucky enough to recognize the symptoms of a stroke, but wasn't educated enough to understand what was really going on. And you figured it all out, Megan murmured, studying the evidence with the attention she would have devoted to a billion-dollar corporate merger. Morgan, you saved my life 3 times, twice from medical emergencies and once from a conspiracy. What happened next exceeded even Morgan's expectations for revenge. Megan Fox wasn't just a successful CEO, she was a corporate strategist who had built an empire dealing with people who tried to betray her. On Saturday morning when Carter arrived at the office for an emergency meeting Megan had called, he found not only her waiting, but also FBI agents, representatives from the Securities and Exchange Commission, and an investigator from the State Medical Board. Wilson, Megan said, with the coldness of someone about to fire an incompetent employee. I'd like to introduce you to some people who are very interested in your extracurricular activities. Carter tried to maintain his composure, but Morgan, watching from afar through the security cameras Marcus had hacked, saw the exact moment when arrogance turned to panic. Megan, what's going on here? If this is about some ridiculous accusation? Megan smiled without humor. Wilson, they're not here to hear accusations. They're here to make arrests based on solid evidence of attempted murder, financial fraud, and market manipulation. Special Agent Martinez began reading Carter his rights as he protested his innocence with the desperation of someone who finally realized his game was up. Dr. Patterson was arrested simultaneously at his office, handcuffs being placed on him as he tried to delete files from his computer. The fourth and final phase was the most satisfying. On Monday, the Chicago Tribune published the full story on its front page, Janitor Hero Exposes Plot to Murder Millionaire CEO Morgan Narrative, a working-class black man using medical knowledge, inherited from his wife, to save the life of a white female executive. Then exposing a complex corporate conspiracy captured the national imagination. But the real coup de grace came when Megan called a press conference in front of dozens of cameras. She not only validated every detail of Morgan's story, but announced his immediate promotion to Director of Corporate Safety and Integrity at Sterling Industries with a salary of $200,000 a year. Morgan Washington, she said to the cameras, has proven that competence, integrity, and intelligence don't depend on degrees or social status. They depend on character, and he has character in spades. Carter and Dr. Patterson watched the press conference from prison, realizing that they had been defeated. Not only legally, but publicly humiliated by the ignorant janitor they thought they could manipulate indefinitely. The final irony was perfect. While Carter faced 25 years in prison for attempted murder and financial fraud, and Dr. Patterson lost his medical license and faced 15 years in jail, Morgan was being celebrated nationally as a hero who proved that true intelligence comes from a heart, not social status. Dorothy would have been proud. His medical knowledge had not only saved lives, but had exposed corruption that could have destroyed many others, and the man she had loved was finally getting the recognition he had always deserved, proving that sometimes justice not only triumphs, it does so in spectacularly satisfying fashion. 6 months later, Morgan Washington sat in his new office on the 26th floor of Sterling Industries with a panoramic view of Chicago and a sign on his door that read, Director of Security and Corporate Integrity, the man who had once been considered nothing more than an invisible janitor. Now LED a team of 15 investigators specializing in detecting corporate fraud. The irony was delicious. The same building where he had pushed cleaning carts for 15 years now welcomed him as an executive with his own desk and a $2 million budget to implement security protocols that other companies were studying. As a model, Marcus Johnson, promoted to electronic security coordinator, entered the office carrying reports on the new monitoring system. They had developed, man. I still can't believe we're here, he said, looking at the glass towers through the window. Remember when you used to clean these rooms? I remember every corner of this building. Morgan smiled, signing approvals for the scholarship program Megan had created in memory of Dorothy Washington. The difference is that now I can change things from the inside. The Dorothy Washington program offered full medical scholarships to low-income students with a special focus on neurology and emergency medicine. It had already benefited 120 young people in 2 years, many of them the children of janitors, security guards, and laborers who never dreamed their children could become doctors. Meanwhile, Wilson Carter was serving his 25-year sentence in a federal prison in Illinois, where he quickly discovered that his corporate arrogance impressed no one. His assets had been confiscated to compensate the victims of his stock market manipulations, leaving him dependent on public legal aid, the very same he had despised when he was in a position of power. Dr. Patterson, discredited and permanently stripped of his medical license, worked as a medical equipment salesman, earning a tenth of what he had made as a doctor. His reputation was so ruined that no hospital in the country would hire him, even for administrative duties. The medical community had banded together to ensure that he never again put lives at risk. Megan Fox transformed Sterling Industries into a national benchmark for corporate integrity. Under her renewed leadership, the company implemented independent medical protocols for all executives, anonymous reporting systems, and strict anti-discrimination policies. The stock price had tripled in 2 years, proving that ethics and profit could go hand in hand. Megan said, walking into the office for their weekly meeting, I just got a call from the White House. They want you to testify before Congress about corporate medical reform." Morgan nodded, accustomed to the national recognition his story had. Generated books had been written about the case, documentaries produced, and medical schools used his story to teach about the importance of clinical observation independent of credentials. The most gratifying thing, however, were the letters hundreds of ordinary workers wrote telling how Morgan's story had inspired them to trust their own knowledge, to speak out against injustice, to believe that competence did not depend on social position. "You know what Dorothy would say about all this?" Morgan asked, looking at her photo on his desk, now in a silver frame. Instead of the simple photo holder he had carried around for years, that medicine saved more than a life. Megan replied, "It saved the truth." Morgan nodded, thinking about how his inherited knowledge had turned into social justice, then systemic transformation. Carter and Patterson thought they were manipulating an ignorant janitor, but they fatally underestimated the power of a man who knew exactly who he was and what he was worth. The lesson that emerged from the story was crystal clear. True intelligence does not come from diplomas hanging on the wall, but from the combination of knowledge, character, and the courage to act when necessary. Morgan had proven that competence does not recognize color, social class, or hierarchical position. It recognizes only the truth today when young workers face discrimination or injustice. Many ask themselves, what would Morgan Washington do? The answer is always the same: observe, learn. Document and act with a surgical precision of someone who understands that the best revenge is the success his oppressors could never imagine. If this story of how knowledge and determination can break down prejudice has touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that justice, when done right, not only wins, it transforms the world around you.